On May 1st, 1983, during what should have been a simple training flight over southern Israel, student pilot Captain Zivi Nedivi felt a violent shock hit his F-15 without warning. Suddenly, the jet snapped sideways, fuel streaked across the canopy, and the nose dropped into a motion he'd never felt before. The radio filled with confused calls. The controls fought him at every touch, and the aircraft refused to settle into anything familiar. In those first seconds, Nedivi faced a choice no pilot wants to meet in midair: reach for the ejection handles or try to keep the jet alive long enough to find a runway. But with no way of knowing the full extent of the damage, the hopeful student had no idea that he was about to prove the F-15 could do something no other aircraft had done before. In the early 1980s, the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle was the bright new star of Western air power. Conceived in a long development cycle with lessons learned from Vietnam and a push for a fighter that could climb fast, turn hard, and keep its energy at high speed, this all-American, all-weather fighter carried two powerful Pratt & Whitney F-100 engines, a large wing, and a tall vertical tail that made it easy to spot, even in a crowded flight line. From its earliest test flights, this model produced numbers that spread quickly to the aviation world. Between January and February of 1975, a stripped-down F-15, known as the Streak Eagle, set a series of time-to-climb records, reaching an outstanding 30,000 feet in under a minute, and more than 98,000 feet in a little over 3. Seeing what this airframe could do when pushed to its limit, air forces from across the West took notice, and orders soon followed from countries such as Japan, Saudi Arabia, and more. When Israel received its first batch in 1977, pilots understood they were getting a machine with speed, altitude reach, and control margins that no other jet in the region matched, and training units spent the next several years learning how to use that capability in everyday flights. Over its years in service, the F-15 built a combat record in the modern era that no other fighter has matched, with more than 100 confirmed air-to-air victories. Yet the most unusual feat ever achieved in an Israeli F-15 had nothing to do with combat at all. On the morning of May 1st, 1983, a duo of Israeli Air Force F-15Ds from 106th Squadron met 4 A4N Skyhawks from 116th Squadron for a routine training sortie over the Negev Desert Training Area in southern Israel. The flights were part of a regular program meant to keep crews sharp in close-in maneuvering, especially when facing aircraft with very different performance profiles, a new high-performance fighter and an older, lighter attack jet that the IAF still use for training. Both sides followed rules meant to reduce risk during rapid maneuvering, with the standard practice to keep a 500-foot buffer or bubble around each aircraft during these drills to allow enough space to pull hard turns, change direction, and react to the opponent's moves without cutting into another aircraft's path. Nevertheless, they aimed to simulate a fight as realistically as possible. That morning, as the basic fighter maneuvers began, F-15 hopeful student pilot Zivi Nedivi was in the front seat, while his instructor, Yehuar Gal, sat in the rear cockpit. The first few minutes followed a familiar pattern, with both sides merging, separating, and setting up again. Through it all, the F-15s climbed and repositioned, while the Skyhawks tried to force them into slower, tighter circles. Then one of the merges tightened too quickly. Nedivi pitched his F-15 upward to regain position, while ahead of him, Peled's A-4 was coming out of a hard turn and slowing more than expected. The two jets were now on converging lines. The Eagle was closing fast, the Skyhawk was losing speed, and the space between them vanished before either pilot could change course. Suddenly, the men on board the F-15 felt a powerful blow from the right side. According to Nedivi, quote, "I didn't have time to react, and the Skyhawk's fireball passed before my eyes. A night of calls began on the radio about someone ditching. I realized that the Skyhawk exploded as a result of the collision, and its pilot ditched automatically." As the jet dropped into a spin, from the back seat, instructor Yehuar Gal called for ejection. But Nedivi pushed the nose down and managed to steady the aircraft long enough to regain partial control. Just as they leveled out, both men looked right. Fuel still streamed from the air where the wing had been, but the smoke was so thick that none of them could see the full extent of the damage. As Nedivi eased the throttle to test their range of motion, the beleaguered F-15 rolled sharply toward the missing side. Keeping up speed was the only way to stay level, with the fuel spray still blocking their view and only minutes of options left, knowing there was an airstrip just miles ahead, they made their decision: land. Trying to regain control, the pilot saw that although all instruments were working, the jet kept pulling to one side. A quick check inside revealed a loose control link shaken free in the collision. Snapping it back into place brought the controls online again, and heavy pressure on the pedals and rudder finally held the jet in a shaky straight line. Ramon Air Base sat only 20 miles ahead on the navigation display, and reaching it meant one thing: keep the jet moving. A straight heading offered the best chance, since any turn risked losing control, so Nedivi held the course and climbed slightly to gain altitude. Burner use stayed off for the moment, with fuel still pouring from somewhere on the right side. Through the spray and smoke, all the student pilot could see of the wing was bent metal. The fuel gauge showed empty. Fuel had been streaming out the whole time, and the tanks were likely drained. Maybe some vapor remained in the lines, maybe enough for one more minute of flight. Now, forward motion was the only priority. As Nedivi later described, from then on, quote, "I acted like a machine. Automatic actions. Not afraid, not worried, knowing only one thing: as long as the plane's moving, I'm in, even if I'm left with only the stick in my hand." 10 miles out, Nedivi dropped the gear. He had to find out how slow the damaged jet could go before losing control. All 3 wheels locked into place. He eased back on the throttles. At 250 knots, nearly twice normal landing speed, the F-15 snapped into a violent spin. Nedivi slammed both throttles into full afterburner. Both engines roared to life, pushing out far more thrust than any approach should need. Fuel was still streaming from the damaged side, feeding straight into the flame. But the surge of power hauled the aircraft back into level flight and kept the nose pointed toward Ramon. Normal landing speed for an F-15 hovered around 130 knots. Anything near that speed in this condition would send the jet into a roll. With the field in view, the arrestor hook dropped, and the F-15 lined up with the runway. No room for error. He crossed the runway threshold at 280 knots. Touchdown came at 260. The jet slammed into concrete and bounced hard before the wheels hammered back down. The arrestor cable caught for an instant before ripping the hook clean off. It skidded down the runway as that brief drag bled 100 knots. The brakes screamed. 200 knots fell to 150, then lower. Metal shrieked against pavement as the barrier rushed closer. The tower scrambled to raise the safety net. 10 meters short, the F-15 finally stopped. As silence settled over the cockpit, Nedivi opened the canopy and reached back toward Gall. A glance over his right shoulder froze him and his teacher in their tracks. The wing was almost completely gone. Only then did the full scale of the collision become clear. Student pilot Zivi Nedivi had just landed an F-15 with only one wing. According to the pilot, quote, "We went out completely shocked. I still hadn't grasped anything, and there was a huge, meaningless smile on my face. We were immediately surrounded by the base pilots who had seen a forced landing and came to hear what exactly had happened." Both crewmen were taken for medical checks and cleared within the hour. News reached the manufacturer soon after, and even though the engineers at McDonnell Douglas had confidence in their well-proven design, they were highly doubtful upon learning that their model had just done the impossible, until photographs and video of the incident finally reached them. The incident drew the attention of researchers studying how aircraft behave after major structural loss, and later wind tunnel trials with a scale model missing one wing showed that the aircraft could be kept under control only within a very narrow window of speed and angle. The findings prompted engineers to examine more closely how to manage an aircraft after a major loss, work that eventually supported the development of adaptive systems such as the Intelligent Flight Control System. Back in Israel, the aircraft was moved to Tel Naf, repaired and fitted with a new right wing. It returned to squadron service, and 2 years after the collision and its unprecedented landing, shared in the downing of a Syrian MiG-23. More than 4 decades later, it appeared again, when during Israel's strike on Iran on the night of October 25, 2024, the same aircraft was spotted once more, still in service, after the landing that should have ended its career.